Video 2, the thoughtful toes, especially the big toes. What are you thinking? Well, the feet know. We think on our feet and they help us stand up for ourselves. Each of the toes has a brain reflex. So it's the brain that takes us on the journey of self-discovery. And we have choices again. We can either get very depressed, go around in circles and dig a very big pit for ourselves, or we can follow the rainbow and make our dreams come true. It's all in the mind. The thumbs and the big toes resonate with one another. So if we know our hand movements, we understand the toes. For example, if somebody does this to you, you know that you've done well, and if they do this, you better start thinking again. This is connected to the big toes. Then the second toe is connected to Mr. Peter Pointer, and this is also connected to self-esteem, self-worth. So when we're lacking self-esteem, we always point outwards and blame externally. The third finger is well known worldwide, but in this case it's all about getting an action and reaction. This is linked to the third toe, and it's all about what we do, how we do it, and so on. Then of course we have the ring finger. I've taken mine off for reflexology, but normally we put the ring on the fourth finger, all about communication, relationship, just as the fourth toes are. Then we have the very polite little finger. When we're drinking a nice cup of tea with the Queen, our little finger will pop out, and this is all to do with society, behavior, and the family. So each toe, or each pair of toes, has a role to play in balancing out our mind. The energy from the toes also goes through the foot as well. The size of the toes is going to show a person's ability to think. So obviously the bigger the toe, the greater the ability to think in terms of playing around with ideas. It doesn't mean that a person with small toes can't play around with ideas. They just are a bit quicker possibly in coming to conclusion. It varies, you've got to take a lot more into consideration, but that's just a general idea. Also the toes, the big toes particularly, point in the direction in which we are headed. So they should be pointing straight forward. But some of the toes are very shy and they start hiding behind the other toes. You also have some that put a mask on. It literally looks as though they have put a mask on the toe pad. I was in Scotland and we had a group of people, mainly ladies, as often the case when I'm traveling the world. And the only man there obviously felt he shouldn't expose his emotions. And he had the most perfect feet when he put them up. And I noticed on his big toe particularly, he had put a mask on. So I just asked him a question, and the question was fortunately the right one for him to let down his cover-up. Then we have toes that are boxed in, and they get very frustrated, as you can see from the colour. It contains a lot of anger, frustration. They're often square in shape. And you also get hammer toes when we feel that we're having our ideas knocked. The interesting thing, though, is that we're knocking our own ideas, but we invite people external to us to knock them for us, to make us aware we're doing it. Sometimes, believe it or not, the big toe does split, and that is when a person's in two minds. Being a spiritual toe, particularly, it means that it's connected not just with the intellect, but with our religious beliefs, our spiritual beliefs, and if these do not come together, then often that toe will split as well. It's all about balance at the end of the day. The toes are also connected, particularly thoughts, are connected, as I said earlier, to our hands. Because, of course, when we have a thought, an idea, we use our hands to express it or put it into action, to manifest it. Also, our feet. And it's the feet that actually bring the balance to us. The toes will show how we are computing our ideas. And literally, it's like a computer. You know, this day and age, the youngsters are so amazing that us who were BC, born before computers, have a bit of a challenge. We can still think, but we're not able always to compute the same way. But that's okay. Everyone's different, and we're all here for a reason. But it's using our ideas that's most important. When it comes to computing ideas, just like a laptop, it's the memories that actually count. The two things that make our body sick are the memories and also our belief systems that do not work for us. So again, what we put into our mind feeds the rest of the body, and it determines how the body functions. And this is exactly what the feet are picking up. What is the input? Because that's going to determine the output. It's going to affect the characteristics of the feet. You may have noticed babies' feet. Their toes are constantly on the go because the toes are the antennae of the body. And the baby's feet are often open and exposed, and they're picking up all the energies that are going on around them. Only as society and parents and people say, you've got to do this, you must do that, then the toes start becoming stiffer, less flexible, etc. So it's keeping an open, flexible mind that will keep the toes flexible, but often as people get older, unfortunately their minds become more rigid, and as the mind becomes more rigid, so do the toes. I wonder what your brain is bantering away about. It'd be interesting to hear yourself talk and just to be aware of how that self-talk is affecting your toes. When we are getting anxious, one of the things we do is we actually scrunch our toes to get a grip, as it is, on the ground. And particularly like at exam times and when we're having to do presentations and so on. So one of the greatest tricks is actually not to have shoes on and to open the toes as wide as possible. The opening of the toes help to also open the mind. So when it comes to the brain waves, we have some thoughts that really work well for us and others that actually weaken the brainwave pattern. When we are very judgmental particularly, and gosh, we have been taught to do that, we are judging many people and many things at many times. And that's one of the things that really affect us and stiffen the toes. If we're more intuitive, that helps enormously. If we suppress our expression, obviously that's going to affect our toe necks as well as our neck and our shoulders. Therefore, we need to learn to be expressive, and this is what reflexology and Rei-flexology do. When you're massaging the feet, it releases the tension so we can become more expressive. The more opinionated we are, the more we are a pain and you know where. So basically, it's looking at every point of view. Also, if we don't look at every point of view, we become a pain in the neck and cannot turn our heads. When we're looking out, loving words, loving thoughts makes a huge difference. Reflexology and Rei-flexology help release these loving feelings. When we're revengeful, critical, restrictive, can you imagine how is the body going to react? That's what we're feeding it. We're being critical. That creates a crisis. So the body reacts according to what we feed it, what we put into it. If, on the other hand, we're kind, cooperative, we become more creative. Thoughts are ethereal, and they come from the universe, which is why I have never copyrighted or franchised any of the universal information. It's available for everyone. The moment that we claim it for our own is the moment we stop the flow. So it's really important to leave it in that ethereal space so it can spread, so that many people can benefit from those thoughts, as I say, that come from the universe. It affects the lymphatic systems, the sensory, the nervous, endocrine, and the structural. As you can see, it goes the whole way through the foot, and we'll be doing that separately as we go along. So if your brain could talk, what would it say? What would it say about your ideas? Are you using them? You know, it's great having fantastic ideas, but if we do absolutely nothing with them, it's a waste of ethereal space. What is it going to say about the ideas you have in mind? Are you brave enough to put them out there? Your reasoning, your opinions, your beliefs, how considerate you are, and your ethics. Unfortunately, society has clamped down on how we should think, and a lot of us have been conditioned to certain ways of thinking, which means that our brains have been suppressed and we're not actually using them as much as we should be. This is where reflexology and Rei-flexology are so fantastic. They liberate the mind so that we can actually start thinking for ourselves. Everybody is unique. We've all come here to make a world of difference. And the way we do that is through our thinking. The biggest problem, of course, is fear. That word again, fear. But fear is merely an illusion. It's the working of the mind. It's fearing something that actually doesn't exist. And when we fear for, obviously that's going to be processed by the whole body. So again, it is so important as the thoughts that we think. With reflexology and Rei-flexology, it helps us process those fearful thoughts and release them, so that the thoughts that are processed by the rest of the body and they're picked up by the feet are that much more flowing and smooth and creative. As you can see, not only do the toes vibrate to certain colors and energy, But this energy actually runs all the way through the body and the feet. So underneath the big toes and all the inner surface is going to show us how we are thinking, the support that we receive from those thoughts. It also shows how we are feeling, our thoughts about how we feel about ourselves and other people. This is the right foot. We're looking at the soles of the feet. This is the right foot. This is the left. And basically what is happening here is when we're looking at the right toes is how we used to think, what went on in the past. The left foot is going to show us how we are thinking in the present, how we're running everything through the system. The most interesting thing is what we do. We often think we are what we think, but it's what we do with those ideas, because as you can see, the yellow, the doing, actions, reactions, runs right through the center of each half of the body, as well as right through the center of the foot. And that is actually what gives us the substance, the resourcefulness. So it's what we do with those ideas. And then comes the communication of those ideas, how we're communicating, sharing them. And finally, how we are grounding them, particularly in our family and society. What affects the shape of the feet and the toes? Well, number one is the swellings. And the swellings can either be structural, i.e. a bone, or it could be fluid, like water. There are many reasons why there are swellings in the body. In the case of the toes, if there is a swelling, or if the toe looks particularly large, that person is showing that they need more space to think. The blood supply will obviously affect to some extent, but it's more looking at the amount of blood that is getting to the toe. Muscle toe, is the toe standing up for itself, or is it bowing and bending into other people's belief system, or is it holding back? There are many different postures that the toe can take on. The bone structure, the bone comes from family society. Bone structure is being one of a kind, and those who like to stand out and who are not too conservative and have their own way of doing it often break bones. I should know, I've done it plenty of times. When I wanted to break free from the rigidity of society or wanted to break free from something I was doing, I didn't actually just do it, I just broke a bone instead, which was a bit crazy actually. But we all choose our journey. And then of course we get indentations and marks on the feet, which can be very, very fascinating. A disturbed mind. What's going to happen to the mind when it's disturbed, particularly by fear, which of course we've seen a lot in this world recently. There's confusion, there's depression, there's ill thoughts, there's distorted belief systems. And some people become too intellectual, which sounds crazy, but they find too many reasons for doing things instead of not doing things and not trusting their intuition. Trusting intuition is a wonderful way of actually dealing with this fear. And of course, there's often an identity crisis, which again we are seeing worldwide. And then of course, there is the pain in the brain. When other people's thoughts are a real pain in our brain, it often is indicative that they're mirroring back what we're doing to ourselves. And again, it's the playback. Often we play back and go through the same old, same old, same old. The thing with the mind is that we should be totally in the present, the gift of the here and now. If we live in the past, then of course we're losing out on time. We're doing the same thing again. And a lot of the diseases are coming from being in the past, hanging on to anger, hanging on to frustration, hanging on to fearful thoughts, hanging on to thoughts that do not serve us. Then, of course, there's other things, aspects, all the oughts of life, which can be a real pain in the brain. When it comes to the toes, the shapes and sizes, there's a lot to think about. But very basically, if there's any swelling on a toe, it's either needing more space or needing to reach out. So, for example, over the ear reflexes, which are on every single toe, if there is a swelling there, they're wanting to hear more. If there's hard skin over that reflex, then they're finding it very difficult to hear something. If it's sunken, then it means they're tired of hearing the same old, same old, same old. Each toe is going to tell a story of its own. The nose reflex on the inside, again, if it's sticking out, it's looking out for more recognition. If it's sunken, it means that they have had their nose knocked out of joint possibly. And even hard skin is finding it difficult to recognize and acknowledge who and what they are. There are many different aspects, but if you know the actual anatomical makeup of the toes and you see where these various variances take place, then you can work it out. There are other things to look for. The position of the toes. I spoke about some of the toes being quite shy. And as you can see here, this toe is hiding behind the feeling toe. So in this particular case, the person is more about how they feel rather than what they're thinking. So they tuck their thoughts behind. I was in Durban once and I had this young girl whose big toe just kept hiding behind the other toes. And I'd never seen it before. As she started talking about her own ideas, her toe popped out. I said to her, "So tell me about how other people tell you to think." She said, "I live with my grandparents. My parents have passed." And as she said that, her big toe disappeared again behind the second toe. And she said, "I'm told what to think." So it's so interesting. Everybody's story is different, but it's asking the questions to say, what is going on? It's not just the big toe that hides. Every toe may hide from time to time. What you do is you say to yourself, is it the thinking, feeling, doing, communications, or family toe? The other thing to look at is to say, okay, which one toe is maybe more dominant? That means they're pushing those ideas ahead of all the others. The reflexology and the Rei-flexology help those toes to get back in alignment. Also, another aspect is the shape of toes. We spoke about that very briefly. But sometimes the second toe looks like it's got a flat top. It looks like a pot that has had the lid taken off. This is a very intuitive toe that's highly linked with the universe. And these people are often visionaries and channelers. Then you get the pointed toes, particularly the little toe often has that very sharp bridge down the center, right over the eye reflex. And because this is the family society toe, it means they see things from both points of view. The society point of view and their point of view. But they're very different, and the two do not gel. And there are many, many more shapes and sizes and things to talk about, but I'm sure you can work those out. Here we have one of the Japanese presentations. I must say the Japanese are one of the best people to present to because they are so interactive. Ooh, ooh, and when you say something that's really good, they, oh, I love being in Japan. So where the mind is, again, you'll see that from the toes. And what will happen if the toes are going over to the right, they're being pulled too much to the past. If they're going to the left, they're going too much to the future. The ideal position for the feet is right in the center. This is why we straighten the feet when we embrace them. So again, it's not just the toes, it's also the whole foot. We can look at the foot, we can look at the toes. There's so many things to look at, it's so exciting. We blame things external to us for our illnesses and diseases and making us uncomfortable. And one of the things is the weather. Whether it's too hot, too cold, too windy or whatever, we always find a reason that it's going to affect us. When we are making heavy weather of our lives, and we all do from time to time, then of course it's going to affect us more. And the weather highlights what's going on anyway. When we draw a picture of a person thinking, we draw a little bubble and then we do a big bubble. And in that we put the thought. The same shape very much as the clouds. Have you ever wondered where your thoughts go after you've had thought them? En masse, they all accumulate and they make up the clouds, which is sometimes why the clouds are so heavy when there's so many heavy thoughts hanging in the air. So depending on where we're making the heavy weather is going to affect the body. So we blame the heaviness of clouds and say that they cause headaches, but in fact it's actually aching to get ahead and can't because there's so much heaviness hanging in the air. People also blame migraines on the weather. But migraines is when it goes against migraine. In other words, other people's thoughts are irritating and it just rubs us up the wrong way. And that's why our heads feel like they're going to explode. Throat congestion, a lot of people get sore throats. Possibly they're not speaking up at home. Or maybe it's too sore to speak up at home. The weather is highlighting, drawing attention to it. With the feet, we would then massage the toe necks. Many people have chest complaints when the weather turns bad and the wind is strong. But again, this is all the emotion because when we breathe out, our emotions hang in the air. So can you imagine all these emotions hanging around and particularly in the home. So chest complaints can often be issues at the home, emotionally, or even in the office. It's just emotional congestion. Also, for example, the temperature change is blamed on digestive disturbances. Look at the words. What are they disturbed about? What are they doing that's disturbing them? What are other people doing that's disturbing them, that they can't stomach? What's going on at a deeper level? Water imbalance. Is there an imbalance in the relationship? And of course, critical conditions is because there's so much criticism in the world, which creates a crisis. So when we lighten up, life becomes better. And when we have reflexology and reflexology, it helps us lighten up enormously. So we talk about mind over matter. If you don't mind, it doesn't matter. In other words, if we don't make a fuss of something, or if we don't make an issue of something, it will not affect the matter. When we make an issue of something and make it matter, then of course it's going to affect the matter. We do mind. So this is why the thoughts are so powerful, because our body only responds badly when we make an issue of something. That's when the matter is affected. So how about thinking another way? Again, reflexology, reflexology gives us the courage of our convictions, the courage to put our thoughts into actions, to feel good about our thoughts. And it doesn't matter if we think another way, because that's why we came to the planet. We came to make a world of difference. Why do the same old that's been done before? There's no progress in that. Expand. Thinking off the top of our heads. Again, look at the angle of the feet. Because as our foot moves, you can see how the various aspects of our body become misaligned. If this little toe, for example, was in the position of where that big toe should be, it means that the person's giving far more priority to family and social thoughts. When they stand upright, then we can allow our own thoughts to flow through, and we can have the balanced approach to life. So the brain's behind it. What is going on at the back of the mind? The back of the mind is where we tuck all those thoughts, all those ideas that we turn our back on literally. But they don't go away. They remain in the subconscious. And this, of course, causes huge uneasiness. Reflexology and reflexology help the individual clear their minds so they can let go of these thoughts that have been tucked away at the back of the mind and causing chaos within. When it comes to massaging the toes, we always massage the tops of the toes first. This helps to release those thoughts that have been tucked away, and it also helps clear the way for the new thoughts and new ideas to come through. The big toe, he's the thinking toe. We call him number 1. He's a very important toe because he shows the direction in which our mind is going. Again, we can apply this thinking, expression, feeling, doing, communication, relationships, and security to the face. And each of these reflexes are on each toe, but the main sensory reflexes are on the big toe. The big toe is the core of our beliefs. It's our spiritual beliefs that run through the body and keep it upright. So the big toes should be pointed forward, side by side. If the toes start separating, the person is being too accommodating and their mind is going off in every single direction and they cannot focus. The way to focus is to get those two big toes together again. So again, another thing that happens with the big toe is sometimes the toes are together up to a certain point when you put them together, and then they start going off at an angle. This is a person who will follow their own thoughts up to a point, and then they will start bending in to please others, to soften the blow. So what am I? That is a question we all like to know. And it's amazing how many words have the word one in them. Alone, done, tone, bone. This is going to give us a clue as to the systems of the body that the big toe is connected to. It's connected to the nerves because, of course, it's got the brain reflex in all the toes, particularly the big toe. So any nervous disorders, reflexology and reflexology can help calm the person down. Having calmed the mind, then the nerves can be calmed as well. Then, of course, the senses. We take the external world into us through our senses, and it affects the internal world. Likewise, how we are feeling internally is going to affect how we relate to the external world. It's also connected to the hormones, the endocrine system, and finally the lymph, which gets rid of all those thoughts and those things that we do not require in our body any longer. It resonates to purple, indigo violet, and interesting enough, how many, like the archbishops and people in the churches, use a lot of purple. It's a very conservative colour. Too much of it can choke us, make us submissive. It can become very tiresome and chaotic. It's a very distant colour, and it can trap people and people become a martyr. On the other hand, that is when it's used in a negative form. On a positive form, when it connects with divinity, it helps us to remember who and what we are at soul level. It's inspirational. It allows us to be reborn and to get back into touch with our authentic selves. It's devotion, refreshment, empowerment. It helps release us, and it's calming, relaxing when we're doing it with reflexology and Rei-flexology, and it helps the regeneration of the body. Now, this is a pretty frenetic chart, isn't it? But then it is a disturbed mind. And when the mind is disturbed, everything is thrown into chaos. Nervous disorders come from control. Being too much or too little throws the balance. So we talk about a lot of people on this planet having Alzheimer's or dementia. These souls were born at a different time. Many of them were born at a time when there were no computers, no cars. In fact, there was so little of technology and far less people. And the thing is also, there weren't so many forms to fill in, etc. And they just don't feel they're in control anymore. So they go out of their minds. They may have been a control freak anyway. And by going out of their minds is another way of controlling other people. It sounds crazy, but we do things because we want to get back what we need to learn from ourselves. Remember, we are working through issues from 7 generations or more. And if control is an issue, it's going to affect the nervous system one way or the other. Epilepsy is just throwing a fit. Why do we throw a fit? Why do we get mad? Why do we get frustrated? Again, because we're not in control. It's different strokes for different oaks. Because people are trying to be too much in control till eventually they trip themselves up virtually and paralyze themselves. Paralyze is when I don't want to get in touch with that part of me anymore. Then we have Parkinson's, which is a very common one, particularly when a person has this intense desire to control everything and everybody, and eventually gets so on the nerves that the whole body starts shaking. Anything that distresses the nervous system is to do with control. That is the question to ask the client. Also, it would be when doing reflexology or Rei-flexology to focus on the big toe. Many of my students used to send pictures of their clients' feet. And this one really stood out for me because, of course, it tells a huge story. I do not know the gentleman, but I can tell what was going on in his life, as would you. But I wouldn't tell him what was going on in his life because I'd ask him the questions. But just for the sake of sharing what would come through a picture like this is to share what is going on at a deeper level. Well, for starters, we can see he's in a wheelchair. Now, in other words, he cannot walk anymore. He has got incredibly long toes, which means he had ideas that were way beyond other people's thinking. But you can see he's an older gentleman from his clothing, and obviously was born at a time when his ideas were squashed, when they were repressed. And what has happened to his toes? They've all started bending. And particularly his big toe, which is his main ideas, the spirit within him. He's tried to fix it. He's tried to keep his morale up. But of course, it has affected the whole of his feet and that he can no longer walk. So that just shows the importance of the big toe, why it's important to stand up, why it's important to get those ideas out there. And reflexology is really good at helping the toes remember what they came to do. The thing is, though, we tend to complicate matters. We are all guilty of that. We confuse the issue, we condemn others, we are very complex beings. And of course, we compound issues because we make a fuss, we make them matter. And of course, we like to be in command. But nothing matters, remember. My beautiful spiritual mother, who's now in heaven, used to say, "Nom, none of my business, nom, NOMB, none of my business, very good, especially when we start poking our nose in other people's business. One of the main reasons we feel uneasy with ourselves, and it can develop into disease, of course, is our belief systems, those that do not work for us. If we ignore our talents, if we ignore our ideas, if we feel inadequate, if we keep making excuses, it means that we're avoiding what we came to do. And the best thing, of course, is before we make an excuse to ask ourselves, why am I not wanting to do this? What is it that I don't wish to get involved in? That may be the very thing we need to get involved in. If we don't do it, then of course it's going to play on our mind, it's going to affect us. Then of course, are we inconveniencing other people? We don't like to do that. But at the same time, is it doing us a disservice? Is it putting us out? Are we using that as an excuse not to get on with our life? And we talk about inherited diseases. And as you can see, I've broken the word here, inherit. There are no inherited diseases, only inherited belief systems. Just as there are no incurable diseases, only incurable belief systems. So be very aware of the beliefs. What are you entertaining in your body? What is making the body so uncomfortable until it becomes uneasy? And then we come to injuries. Isn't that interesting? Because we judge ourselves. The brain is the judge, and that's reflected in the big toe. And the rest of the body is the jury. So they make decisions. So if we're judging ourselves harshly, then we punish ourselves. One of the ways we punish ourselves is to injure us. And look at that word, injury. Why am I harming myself? Why am I doing this? What am I telling myself? What is my story? And the same with the client or the person's speech you're doing. Why are they hurting themselves? Why are they keep smashing themselves up? What is this history? Has it gone back 7 generations or more? What is going on? And then of course we talk about things being bad. Bad weather, bad food, bad people, bad behavior. What's bad? What actually does bad mean? It's labeling so many different things. As soon as we label something bad, our body becomes defensive. Anything we're interacting with on this planet is neutral until we interact with it. When we wake up in the morning, we are neutral. Our energy is neutral. It's only when we start interacting with people and start thinking and feeling that things change. And whatever we label external to us and take internal is going to change the energy. So if we label food as bad and we believe it to be bad, what is the body going to believe? It's going to believe it's bad. So it's going to react badly. And that's the same with anything else that we take on board that we believe to be bad. Just think about that bad. Bad debt. That's a big one, isn't it? So when it comes to massaging the big toe, and all the toes for that matter, we're going to acknowledge every single level of our thinking, our expressions, our feelings, our doings, our communications, and the family. So we're going to first do it across the tops and across the side, and we go from the little toes to the big toes, because we are most influenced from birth, from our family. But the toes that are most important, or the beliefs that are most important, are our own ideas, our own thoughts, our own spirituality. Then, of course, we're going to take it down as well, the energy down. That helps to flush through those ideas and get them through the system. And anything that's no longer of value to us will be released energetically. What is the sense of being sensible? We have these sensory organs, and as I said earlier, we take the outer world through our senses. And it really depends on what's going on in our mind as to how we take the outer world in. Through the eyes, that are not just reflected on the face, interesting enough, because whatever we see affects how we breathe. Therefore, whatever we see is going to affect the respiratory system. Whatever affects the nose, the cheek, and the ears is going to affect the upper digestive tract. And whatever affects the mouth is going to affect the lower digestive tract. And of course, the chin is the basic stability. So when massaging the feet, it's important to bear this in mind. So we tend to get caught up, if it's an eye issue, to focus on the eye issue. But it could be far more, because what we're taking through the eyes is affecting the chest, the breast, and the balls of the feet. The main sensory reflexes are on the big toe, but remember every single toe have these reflexes, but they affect it according to whether it's the emotional toe or whether it's the doing toe, and that is how we're going to see things emotionally or because of what we're doing. So we're looking at the big toe, we've done the brain reflex, and now we're going to look at each center of the toes for the eye reflexes. So the eye reflex is also reflected onto the balls of the feet because it affects the lungs and the breast area as well. We can carry this sequence through. Just remember that it's not just on the toes. It makes the body come alive when we're doing reflexology and Rei-flexology. It makes it more understandable. If a person has a pain right here, then of course now we can take it a step further and say, what is it that they're seeing that's hurting them? They're hurting their feelings. What is going on? The eyes are very interesting because, as I say, whatever we see affects how we feel. I took this beautiful young girl to aqua aerobics with me. Afterwards, I took her to breakfast and both of our eyes were going very, very red. Now, what do we do as humans? We go, what caused that? And the obvious is chlorine. And I said, but no, it can't be the chlorine because I am swimming 3 times a week. What was actually happening was her mother had just been diagnosed with breast cancer, and it was hugely emotional for both of us. I said to her, it's actually about our emotions. And afterwards we were talking and she said, oh, I love those little doggies. And I asked her which one, and I said, what do you love about them? And then she saw a van, the ones that carry money. She said, I hate those vans. I said, isn't that interesting? Do you listen to the words you're saying? You look at the little dog and you say you love it. You look at the van and you say you hate it. Is that going to affect the body? Of course, our love and hate of things. So the eyes are going to affect what we see, how we feel. The nose and the cheeks and the ears are going to be affected by what we do and don't do. Our nose out of joint, our mouth by our communication relationships, and of course the jaw by what's going on in the family society. And we can take this a step further, which is so exciting because a lot of people do facial reflexology and Rei-flexology. For me, again, it needs to be an anatomical form for me to really understand. When the person comes, if you're the practitioner or therapist, look at the hair. Are there partings in the hair? That is where the mind is divided. If the hair falls mainly over to the right side, their thoughts are still entertaining the past because that's where the ends are. If they're mainly to the left, they're going right into the future. If they have a parting right down the center, they have made a division. That is as much as I'm going to think of the past and it's not going to connect with the future. Ideally, no partings. The length of the hair is the length that we go to. The longer the hair, the more length we go to please others. The shorter the hair, the quicker we go to the point and we don't mess around in our minds. So we're very direct. And there's many other things, curly hair going around in circles, but again, it's going to give a clue as to how the person is thinking. Then this is the shoulder reflex on the top here, which is to do with our expression, which affects the eyebrows. And you know that, people can use their eyebrows to express themselves all the time. The eyes, again, the lungs. But what I find most fascinating about this chart is when people have these piercings. And I noticed this particularly when I was traveling. And this girl had a piercing, a ring through her nostril on the right side. And I said to her, why do you have that ring? She was such a beautiful girl. Why did she just put that ring in there? She said, I don't know. I like it. So I said, well, tell me about what's going on in the past, what was done in the past. And what transpired was her mother is a Taurian and led her by the ring on her nose, which she didn't really like. So she was highlighting it, drawing attention to it. The other thing that I saw in Cape Town was a young girl who had a diamond stud in her nostril on the right side of her nose. And again, I said to her, what is going on? And she said, my mother died of pancreatic cancer when I was 7 years old. The reflexes is over, the pancreas. And pancreatic cancer is to do with unhappiness about something that was done or not done. So that could be taken further to find out how this girl can help herself. What we do as humans is we fill the gaps, we fill the holes. When there's something missing in a person's life, they will often make a hole to show where something is missing. In her nose, she had put a diamond to fill the gap, to make things brighter, to cheer herself up. So for me, this is a very, very powerful chart. Along with the rings and studs on the mouth, ask about communications and relationships. Are they able to speak up? Or are they tongue-tied? Are they having to anchor their tongue and hold their tongue literally? The big toe is also connected mainly with the endocrine system, which is the orchestra of the body. It creates balance, and when we strike a chord, then of course everything is harmonious in the body. The hypothalamus in the brain picks up our moods, and then it composes the body accordingly. It sends directives to the pituitary gland, which is the conductor of the orchestra. The conductor then directs all the other glands as to how to function. But when it comes to the endocrine system and reflexology and Rei-flexology, it's not just about the glands, because there are several aspects that are involved. There's the gland itself that does the secretions. Then there is the blood flow, which carries the hormones. And of course, if this is constricted, it's going to affect the hormone flow. Then finally, there are the target cells, where the activity takes place. So there's actually 3 areas to be aware of when massaging the endocrine glands. When we massage the pituitary gland, which is situated on the inner edge of the big toe, where the joint is, it is also on the little toes, but we concentrate on the big toe. The pituitary and the pineal, and some people call it pineal glands, are situated together in the head. But because the pineal gland functions according to the amount of light coming through the eyes, this is another aspect to take into account, particularly when there's cycle disorders like menstruation cycles and sleep disorders, because not only is it the pineal gland, but it's also the eyes that we need to massage. Next is the thyroid. The thyroid, of course, is shaped like a butterfly and is about having space to be oneself. What happens with the glands is they become hyperactive when they're trying to get on top of a situation. Particularly the thyroid. When a person feels they don't have enough space for themselves, they can't get on and do their own thing. They're running around other people all the time. So what will happen is the thyroid will become hyperactive and it will swell. If it gives up and says, oh, I've had enough of this, I can't take any more, it will become hypoactive and not be able to produce as much as it should. Next down we have the thymus. The thymus is seated right in the chest area. It's the seat of the soul. And as you know, in the jungle, the gorillas, they beat their chest. The warriors, before they go up to war, used to beat their chest. Why? Because this is also where we secrete the T cells, the immunity of the body. So what they were doing was to get those immunity going. When we attack ourselves continually, the thymus gland does not like it. It will start producing extra T cells to defend itself, or so it's thinking. But what actually happens, it ends up attacking itself. So we massage the thymus gland reflex to help a person feel better about who and what they are, to boost their self-esteem, to boost their immunity, so they don't feel so fragile and under attack all the time. We next have the adrenals. The right adrenal is slightly low because of the liver reflex. And the adrenals have got a very poor reputation of fight and flight. But in fact, they're all about courage. We only run away when we're frightened. But the adrenals are there to give us the courage to be unique, to put our amazing concepts and ideas into practice so other people can benefit. Then we no longer have to run away. We can stand tall and proud. Then we have the pancreas. The pancreas provides the love and the joy in the body. It maintains a sugary environment. Where does the sugar come from? It comes from the joy of doing things, from the happiness of making things happen. So the pancreas is a very happy soul unless we're not enjoying life. If we're putting ourselves down, if we're finding it a drudgery, dragging our feet from place to place and moaning about everything in life. The pancreas starts playing up 18 months to 2 years after a traumatic event, such as a divorce, a death, or anything like that, when this joy has been taken out of somebody's life. Next we have the ovaries. Again, this is a very interesting fact when it comes to massaging and understanding what the various glands are for. If you see, most of them are falling in our thought areas, what we think are our main intellectual area. The adrenals are falling under the third toe, and in the third area. So they're all to do about doing. The ovaries are on the outer edge, which is the family edge, and it's in the communication relationship and also the social area. The ovaries are all about generating new concepts. The more fertile the mind, the more fertile the body, and the more fertile the ovaries. I'll be covering that with the reproductive area. Finally, we have the testes, which are on the inside of both heels. Now, the testes are very fascinating, the testes reflex, I should say, because they will alter position according to the weather. When it's cold, they start migrating towards the body, and when it's hot, they tend to migrate away from the body. So you will find the testes in different positions. Moving on to the spinal reflex, which is also connected mainly to the big toe, and it runs down the inner edge of the foot. So you've also got your spinal cord reflex there as well. If you run your finger along the top of your arch, you will find this bony ridge, which feels like a miniature version of the spine. The tops of the feet are the back of the body, where we tuck away a lot of the memories and things that we do not want to embrace or confront. So when massaging the spinal reflex, it will often evoke a lot of memories, according to whether it's emotional, what was done, wasn't done, communication, relationships, and family. And the sort of things that we tuck behind our back, and again we can see where's this coming from. All the aches are the longing to get on. All the pains, the past hurt within, are from the emotional area. The abuse, the abnormal use, comes from the actions and reactions. The horror of what happened is usually because it's communicated one to another, communications and relationships. And then finally, the torment, that comes from family. And of course, if you put tormental on the end, it also takes on the mental aspect. So we're back to the thoughts again. And many people fear back problems. And the thing is, with back problems, it's all about what we have tucked behind us, what we haven't embraced, all those hurts, all those memories, all those beliefs that now need to be acknowledged. Again, it's which part of the back. So the most common, of course, is the lower back. And the lower back is very much to do with self-worth, support from the family. There's many different reasons why people develop low back pain, but it's the basic structure of our being. And the wonderful thing about reflexology and Rei-flexology, it helps us to release that fear, release the fear of what we've put behind us. It helps us to acknowledge all those energies at a subconscious level, so we don't have to relive them. It just allows them to evaporate energetically. When it comes to reflexology and Rei-flexology, it's fascinating to look at the instep, because here we're going to see what's going on in the core of the body. How flexible the mind is going to show up in the toe necks. Sometimes on the tops of the feet, which remember are the back of the body, are these soggy sort of bulges, like pads, I suppose. And these are unshed tears. So reflexology and Rei-flexology, by massaging that area, is going to help give incredible relief. Often people will go home and have a good old blub. Then, of course, we have what we call the guilt bumps. Now, what actually happens is that the time in the womb is reflected into the spine, and therefore the first trimester is the emotional time when the woman finds out she's pregnant. And what actually happens there, often I will explain on the second toe with the bunion, because that's an interesting one. It's linked to that time. Sometimes you get bony bumps in the middle area, which would be the second trimester, because suddenly now the woman realizes what she has to do. Maybe there is a bit of guilt. I used to have the most incredible guilt bumps, and they really stuck out like bunions halfway down my foot. Then I look back at my mother's journey while she was pregnant with me. She was traveling from England to Kenya via the Suez Canal on an army boat with her 18-month-old son. She wasn't able to talk to anyone during that 6 weeks, and she had to stay in her cabin all that time because the railing outside was not safe for a little child. Can you imagine what that would be like for 6 weeks closeted inside? And of course she felt guilty, and I took on that guilt. When I understood it, my guilt bump disappeared. So look for the bumps. It may be in the communication areas. It also can mean reaching out for more support. When the bones start reaching away from the spinal reflex, it can be reaching out, asking for people's help. Then, of course, going further down, this is the lower back area of the foot, but below the lower back area, we can get gender issues. I had a young lady who came and did the workshop, and she had these little white lumps. And she said, it's crazy, I'm getting more and more of them. So I said to her, so what's going on in your life? And her story was that she was working in a male environment. And in those days, I'm talking about the 1990s, it was predominantly male ruled. And women could only be promoted up to a certain point in business. What was happening with her, she had all these fabulous ideas, but she was having men promoted above her and putting her ideas into practice and being paid for it. No wonder she was so frustrated. It was a frustration about being a female and not being acknowledged as a female in her case. It's also interesting to note the stature of the feet. So sometimes the person holds himself back or they're pushing themselves forward, and this will affect the feet. When we're massaging the spinal reflex, it is beautiful to incorporate the metamorphic technique based on the time in the womb and the memories that are stored inside. And it's done very, very gently. It's almost a feather touch. But what happens is that when we place our digit, whichever one the energy is drawn to, it's the time of conception. And as we run our finger or our thumb along this line, what it does, it helps unlock those memories. It goes through the first trimester, the second trimester, the third trimester, and then the time of birth. This is fabulous for people who have issues that go back to childhood and before they were born. On the tops of the toes, we have our nails. What do the nails represent? They represent the cranium. And what does the cranium do? The cranium protects the brain. So what are the nails doing on the toes? They are metaphysically protecting our ideas, which is why we do not like others treading on our toes. When there's additional need to protect our ideas, our toenails thicken. When we want to expose our ideas, the toenail falls off to show what's going on beneath it. It's very painful. And there's many other aspects of nails which are very fascinating, but they all tell a story. So when it comes to the toes, particularly the big toe, it's all about control. And one of the reasons we really like to be in control is because we're fearful of losing control and not having control over other people and other things. When we trust the universe, that's a different matter. And reflexology and Rei-flexology help us to overcome that fear. It's the first step towards wisdom. If you'd like to explore this more, please go to my website www.alwaysbewithoutthee.com, where you will find information on the 9 books that I have already written on the subject of reflexology, channeling, and the language of the feet, as well as the emotional and spiritual aspects. Remember, healing and health are only 2 feet away.